Hello, in this video we'll be looking at Geren Karunatillaka, new course in reading Pali, the grammar section for lesson 1, which begins at page 4, and in this video we'll be looking at the nouns dealt with on pages 4 to 6. So I'll read it out and give my own observations as we go along. I should emphasize that people following this course should all have seen my video, which is on my video channel, um, entitled Roots and Stems. It's vitally important that you should all have an understanding of exactly what we mean when we use these words roots and stems in connection with Pali grammar. The same equally applies to Sanskrit. And all of you who are watching this will almost certainly have received from me the necessary materials, including links to the YouTube channel where the video is to be found. So starting off with nouns, looking at 1.1 on page 4, Pali nouns occur in a stem form, which can be considered the base from which the other forms are derived. Well, yes, that is dealt with in detail in my video on stems. For example, let's just take the word Buddha. Now, the word Buddha, just ending in a short a, well, apart from being the vocative singular, if you were addressing O Buddha, that does happen to be the same as the vocative singular. But in all other cases, the word wouldn't end in an a in normal running prose or verse for that matter. It would be either buddho, buddham, buddhassa, with all these different endings on. Which show its function in the sentence, the nominative, accusative, genitive, and through to the others. But when we cite a word, we're just talking about a word or looking a word up in the dictionary. We use the stem form, and the stem form for nominative, for masculine and neuter nouns ending in a short a is just that form ending in a. Buddha, Nara, Vihara, and so on. Three genders, looking at 1.12 now. Three genders, masculine, feminine, and neuter. Now, there's some correlation between the gender, what you might call natural gender, and grammatical gender in Pali. That is to say that where the where the noun refers to a male person or animal, it will mostly be masculine, be grammatically masculine. And the same applies to feminine if it refers to a female human being or animal. It will almost always be feminine. There are some exceptions to that. But you'll just learn those as you go along, and there's nothing especially complicated about them. Where you have nouns, I'm reading here, referring to groups and to inanimate things and to concepts, they are unpredictable with regard to gender. Probably most of you are familiar with, for example, the basic genders in French. Males are masculine, females are feminine, but if it's objects, it could be either masculine or feminine. The same in Italian and Spanish. Um, and it is the same in Pali and Sanskrit as well. It could be if the name for a thing could be in any gender. Um, the example is given here of the word, for example, Sena, army, is feminine, and Dhammo, doctrine, is masculine, and Ratti, night, is feminine. You can I would say even in most cases, tell the gender of a noun by looking at it in its its stem and or nominative form. Even then, it's not always apparent. But in reality, it's not going to pose a problem for you unless you are going to going to impose upon yourself the burden of actively remembering which gender a noun is. But since the vast majority of us are just learning this in order to be able to read rather than to reproduce accurate Pali, we're just learning to read Pali and, of course, to understand it when it's chanted. It will be enough simply to recognize what gender a noun is, rather than to be able to reproduce it out of your memory. And even then, if you don't recognize what the gender is, it's not especially important, but it is, as you will see as we go along, highly advisable that you do. Gender is important. In that, many words will distinguish with a word in the masculine and a word in the feminine will actually mean different things, and adjectives have to agree with the noun. Excuse me, just looking after someone's dog. Sorry about the interruption. Back to where we were. Looking now at 1.13, there are two numbers, singular and plural. When we talk about number in grammar, we mean singular and plural. We talk about a noun or an adjective, indeed in verbs as well, being in the singular number or the plural number. It's just a grammatical convention. So there are two numbers in Pali, just a singular and a plural. Those of you who know Sanskrit will, of course, know that there are three numbers in Sanskrit. There's the singular, the dual, and the plural. And the dual, which has full declensions and conjugations through the noun and the verb system, is used when you're talking about two of something. And that's a distinction that's carefully observed in Sanskrit. If you're talking about two people, the noun and the adjective forms must be in the dual, not the plural, and likewise the verbs in the dual and not the plural. Those of you who know classical Greek will remember that classical Greek likewise has a dual number, though it tends there to refer to things that typically go in pairs, not just two of anything. In Sanskrit, two of anything, if on your table you've got a pen and a cup, so the pen and the cup are on the table, you'd have to use the verb in the dual because there are two things. Sanskrit. In Greek, they say that the dual tends to be used, classical Greek tends to be used for things that go together, like your eyes or your ears, or a pair like a husband and wife, Gemini, things that go together day and night. But in Pali, the dual form has been, apart from a couple of slight remnants that you don't need to worry about, the dual number has disappeared, and so you don't need to worry about that. I should mention also that, for example, the difference from classical Greek to modern Greek, the dual number has disappeared in modern Greek, so it's just singular and plural. Now, the cases, they're called the cases. The word is vibhakti in Pali, vibhakti in Sanskrit, meaning a division. Let me just call up my screen iPad. Here we are. Oops. So the word for a case is a vib, vibhati. So my pen's playing up it. Vibhati. It's from the Sanskrit, say from Sanskrit, equivalent to the Sanskrit vibhakti, which literally means a division. So the noun, according to the nomenclature of Sanskrit and Pali grammar, is treated as having 8 divisions, 8 forms in which it can occur. And they're listed here, looking at 1.14 now, the 8 cases: nominative, accusative, instrumental, genitive, dative, ablative, locative, and vocative. Now, fear not, it's not as bad as it seems. at first sight, and you'll very soon get used to it. So, what's the use of the nominative? It's when you're just naming something, um, or it's the subject. The most common use is when it's the subject of the verb. Um, it's where in English we would say I, he, she, they, rather than me, him, her, them. It's just I, he, she. That's it. We call that the nominative. So bhikkhu vayamati. Uh, Giving the example here, a bhikkhu strives. And it's also used where, for example, you're introducing a topic of conversation. There's one sutta, the name escapes me at the moment, where the Buddha is saying, existence, existence, O monks, what is this thing that is called existence? Just say bhavo, bhavoti, bhavo. He just uses it in the nominative because he's naming it. What nominative means, you're naming it as the topic of the discussion. So those two are the most common uses of the nominative. The accusative is generally used, looking at 1 spot 14 spot 2 now, as the object of a verb. Um, so bhikkhu chittam pagganhati. That's the example given here. The bhikkhu uplifts the mind. I'll also mention here a very, very common use of the accusative, which is known as the accusative of motion or the accusative of destination. So, for example, we've got the iPad showing. So we've got vihara, which we know is a vihara. We use the word in English now, meaning a monastery. That's in its stem form. It is a masculine noun, so in the nominative, the a becomes o. So in the nominative, it becomes viharo, and in the accusative, this is all set out in tabular form halfway down the next page. That's page 5 of Karunatillaka. So viharam. So if I see the monastery. Viharam passami. Passami. I see. Viharam passami. If you just want walking along, ooh, a monastery, viharo, viharo, you would say. We are discussing, I'm going to say it like this, we are discussing the word vihara. Note I said vihara, they're not viharo, viharam. We're discussing vihara because I'm talking about a word that we are discussing, not a word kind of in its regular function in the sentence, but we are discussing the word vihara in a grammatical sense, so we use the stem form. Now, viharam passami, I see the monastery, viharam, accusative. Now, I was saying that this other very, very common usage is known as the accusative of motion or the accusative of destination. Means the same thing in grammatical terms. So if you're going to the monastery, in English we talk about going to something, but in Sanskrit and Pali just say I go monastery. In the accusative form, that's the accusative reflecting, that's the where you're going, the destination, the the objective to which you are going. So viharang gachami, gachami means I go, something that most of you who are watching this will have chanted possibly many thousands of times. Buddhang saranang gachami, gachami I go. I go to the Buddha. Hmm? Buddhang gachami. You will know that one. Nagara, city. He goes to the city. He's going to town. Nagarang gachati, the ang ending. Now, the vocative, as the name suggests, the Latin vox, voice, vocare, to call. We have that same word in English, but invoke, for example. So the vocative is the word used when you're, say, calling somebody or attracting his attention. Very, very frequently, the Buddha says in the suttas, "O monks." Now, let's look at the word Buddha. The nominative, Jasin, would be Buddho. The accusative, Buddham or Buddhang. I'll deal with that or ang ending later. The vocative of nouns ending, so stem ah nouns is just ah. So the vocative happens to be the same as the stem form. So if you were saying, "Oh Buddha," you would say Buddha. And Ananda, the disciple Ananda. When we're talking about Ananda, we all know the name Ananda. By the way, don't pronounce it Ananda. That means joyless. It's Ananda, which means joyful or bringer of joy. Very important difference there. Not Ananda, Ananda. So if you're if you're talking about Ananda, Anando, nominative. Just say Anando, the good monk, Anando. And I'm going to see Ananda would be Anandang Gacchami. I'm going to Ananda. But if you are now calling him Ananda, that's the vocative to attract his attention by calling his name Ananda. The example given here in paragraph 1, spot 14, spot 3 is Bhikkhave. That's actually that is an irregular vocative plural. I think I'm right in saying it's the only irregular vocative plural in the entire language, because normally the vocative plural is the same. In the plural, the vocative is the same as the nominative. In the singular, it's different. In nominative singular, buddho, anando. Vocative singular, buddha, ananda. But bhikkhave is an irregular, or it's an old Eastern dialect Magadhi form that has crept into classical Pali. So 1 spot 14, spot 4. It says here the other cases are commonly the equivalent of English prepositions. So what that actually means is that where in English we tend to use prepositions, by, with, to, from, for, of, that kind of thing, Pali expresses the same meaning, but by means of these case endings, the different endings on the form of the noun. It says, as a general guideline, we might note that the dative case, often but not always, translates as the English to or for. So, for example, the Buddha taught the doctrine for the benefit and happiness of the many. So, hitam, neuter noun, stem form hitta is meaning benefit. Stem form hitta, it's a neuter noun, so the neuter singular hitam, but the dative hitaya, for the benefit. Sukha, neuter, nominative sukham, for the happiness of people. Sukhaya, meaning for the purpose of. The ablative meaning from, generally motion away from something. Locative, generally locative, as the name implies, location. If you're in a vihara, if you're standing in the vihara, is vihare tetati, he stands. Vihare, so vihara, stem form, viharo, nominative, viharam, accusative, viharang gacchami, vihare home, I am in the vihara. And we have the genitive, generally meaning of, belonging to, and that's the one that ends in assa. In Sanskrit, asya. In Pali, assa. And incidentally, I'll mention here that this ending asya, Sanskrit assa Pali, is directly cognate, I mean, from the same linguistic origin, historical origin, as our English S, as in apostrophe S ending. It's the same ending. German has it, the Scandinavian languages have it, and English has it. You know, the the Buddha's teaching. We can say the teaching of the Buddha or the Buddha's apostrophe S teaching, meaning the same thing. Um, so that apostrophe S, or in the plural, of course, S apostrophe, that we use in English is it's the same assa, asya ending that we have in Pali and Sanskrit. As for the word order, incidentally, it's interesting to note that we talk about the Buddha's teaching, apostrophe S, Buddha's teaching. The Buddha's has to come first. We can't say the teaching Buddha's, apostrophe S, is just bad English. And equally, we say if we're um, using the of form of expressing, we say the teaching of the Buddha. We wouldn't say the of the Buddha teaching, we say the teaching of the Buddha. There's that fixed word order in English. In Pali and Sanskrit, the genitive form ending in asa, its normal position is before the noun that it qualifies. So Buddhassa Dhammo, the Dhamma, the teaching of the Buddha, the Buddha's teaching. So its normal word order is the same as the English word order with the apostrophe S form. It's not inviolable, it's not always, but that's the standard normal word order. And we also have the instrumental form, that typically in nominative and neuter ah nouns. By an ah noun, I mean a noun whose stem form ends in a short ah. Typically find that ending in ena. It means by or with, and it's called the instrumental. You're doing it by the instrumentality of something. You are hitting a nail with a hammer. That would be in the instrumental in Pali. Also, you are giving an example by your patience and kindness. That would also be in the instrumental. It goes on to say, however, these represent only some of the most general senses and uses of the cases. Others will appear as we proceed. It goes on to say 1.2, 4 common types of nouns appear in this reading: masculine a stems, neuter a stems, and feminine I or E stems. Note it'll come up again and again, the important difference between long and short vowels. One very common example is bala, strength, and bala, fool. Let me write this up for you. So bala. And they are two different sounds, and perceived by the native ear as two entirely different sounds. So we have the a, I, u, u, and for example, the differences to the native ear of the speaker of the northern Indian languages, of which Pali is one, and the same applies to the modern languages of northern India. The I and the E and the U and the U and the A and the A are completely different sounds, as much as they are to the ear of the native English speaker. For example, the native English speaker doesn't confuse the words ship and sheep when we hear them, and they are two completely different sounds. And for example, full and fool and pull and pool, they're different sounds for each other, meaning different words. So that is why the distinction between long and short must be as carefully observed in Sanskrit and Pali as it is in English, though it occurs the entire time in Sanskrit and Pali much more commonly than in English, that words are differentiated by the length of the vowel, long or short. So I'll go on to read the note at the bottom. Nouns used as examples in paradigms. It just means an example given as a noun. For example, halfway down page 1, there's this table, which is the paradigm, an example given of the noun Dhamma. So nouns used as examples in paradigms in the grammars, like the ones that follow, will generally be cited according to their stem forms. I said then that's normal. And it's how you look it up in a dictionary as well. You look it up in the stem form. For example, if you were looking up the word uh, of the Buddha, Buddhassa. You see Buddhassa, I'm going to look up Buddhassa. If you look up Buddhassa, you will look in vain. The dictionary won't give it in that form. It will just give it in its stem form, Buddha. Otherwise, you'd be looking up Buddho, Buddham, Buddhassa, Buddhaya, Buddhena, Buddha, Buddhe. The diction just doesn't give all these different forms. When as the head word, when you're looking up the word, look it up in the stem form, and under the stem form, then you will get the description of the word and its meaning and its uses. Um, in the glossaries in this book, it says the gender of nouns will be given separately only for a few nouns with special characteristics. What it actually means here is that where the ending of the noun clearly shows what the gender is, it won't specify. For example, you might have stem form rupa, meaning a form, which we know is Buddha Rupa and Nama Rupa. It's a neuter noun, so the nominative is Rupam, not Rupo, Rupam or Rupang, written as a M with a dot underneath. So in the glossaries in this grammar, the Gern Karuna Tilaka's grammar, you see the word, for example, Rupam ending in as I know that's a neuter noun. Buddha Viharo, give us Buddho Viharo, so you would know that it's masculine. It doesn't always work because, for example, you've got words ending in a long ah, which that's the feminine nominative feminine singular, the most common, not the only one by any means. It's the most common feminine singular ending is in sena, army. But there are other nouns in which the nominative singular ends in a long "a" that are not feminine. We have it in the word, for example, sata, meaning a teacher. Sata, deva manusanam sata, the teacher of gods and men. But we will deal with that as we go along. There's no point. Just be aware of what I've said, but there's no need to try to remember it at the moment. So it says here, the gender of a noun will generally be indicated by the way in which it ends. As I said, well, yes, mostly, but not always. You'll get used to it, and there will be a standard way of indicating each class. I think it means each gender here. Usually this will be the nominative singular unless otherwise noted. Yeah, that would be the normal way of doing it. As for example, nouns ending in o, and I in the glossaries will belong to the masculine a stem, the neuter a stem, and the feminine I stem, respectively. He says classes here. It's actually more correct to say genders. Students should also expect some fluctuation in the endings of specific nouns with regard to gender, since nouns often shifted from one, he said class again, from one gender to another in the history of Pali. For example, some nouns given as masculine here may appear with neuter endings in some texts, and dhammo given here in the masculine form, in which it usually occurs with the plural dhamma, may appear in some texts with the neuter plural ending dhammani. That is correct. Yeah, Sanskrit generally is more strict about what gender a noun is. There are some fluctuations where a noun can be both masculine or masculine and neuter, for example. But you often find that in Pali, a noun will be sometimes masculine, sometimes neuter. The example given here, Dhamma, usually it's a masculine, so the masculine nominative singular form would be dhammo, but you do occasionally find it turning up as a neuter, which you can tell as by its plural form dhammani, because the ani ending is the typical neuter plural ending for a stem nouns, which you'll see in the table at the bottom of page 5. Where you see rupani for the nominative and accusative plural. So even where there is no change in gender, there may be he's written should be alternative endings that appear in different periods and texts. We'll deal with those as we go along. And I do emphasize here, don't try, if you're new to this, don't try to remember everything that's been said here. Just the main thing is just understand what is being said, be aware of it, and we'll deal with the detail as we go along. This is, as given in this grammar book, a broad and general in introduction. So in the paradigm below, it says, and it's the second full paragraph on page 5 now. In the paradigm below, and in others that follow, forms separated by a forward slash are alternants. Well, so he's made a mistake. It's alternatives. The choice between one and the other is an alternative, not an alternate. Forms in parentheses are alternative forms which are less common or generally found in later or commentarial texts rather than in canonical texts. Just note that point there. We look at the old suttas, which the real old stuff from the Nikayas, the Digha Nikaya, Majjhima Nikaya, and Guttara Nikaya, and the others, Samyutta Nikaya. That tends to be the older texts, reflecting the form in which they were first written down in Sri Lanka about 100 BC. Remember, they'd been remembered in oral form for something like 400 years after the death of the Buddha, before they were first written down. So the earliest pure Pali that we have, I'm ignoring the inscriptions of Ashoka for a moment, the earliest pure Pali that we have, or what we know as now standard Pali, is as it was recorded in writing in Sri Lanka in about 100 BC. Now the commentarial text, and you get Pali being written, well, still is, but you get the commentarial texts, the commentaries on the suttas that were written much later, works like the Visuddhimagga, which appeared much later, maybe 1,000 years or so later, written in Pali. But you find these other forms creeping in. But you'll learn them as we go along. It doesn't in reality create a problem for the learner. So that's all you need to do at this moment, is recognize them rather than remember them actively, so that you can reproduce them. Just recognize them. So although we do give alternative endings when forms are introduced, and have attempted to give all of those that the student is likely to encounter, we have not striven for utter completeness, so as to give all of the alternatives for each gender of nouns that occurred among the history of the language. Each class, it could mean gender or declension here. We talk about verbs having classes, but strictly speaking, talk about nouns having classes. But it doesn't really matter. Anyway, back to the text. One who has passed beyond this introductory text and is reading Pali texts on his or her own may thus need to consult one of the more complete grammars available as the need arises. No problem there. I will guide you to and through those as we go along. And the same applies to alternative forms of verbs. So here we now come to the paradigm of masculine a stems. These have a stem in hyphen a, meaning that you get the word and then the word with just a at the end. That's the stem form. So the example given here is Dhamma, doctrine, quality, and of course all the meanings that the word Dhamma has in Sanskrit, Dharma, Dhamma in Pali. So let's go down the singular column. You'll see the nominative, accusative, genitive, dative, instrumental, ablative, locative, vocative. You'll see that the in this table, looking down the left-hand column, you find the first three letters and then the rest of the word given in brackets. That's just to show that these words, nominative, accusative, and so on, are very commonly abbreviated in grammars to nom, ac, gen, dat, inst, ab, loc, voc, just as abbreviations for these eight cases that you'll very commonly see. And that's how it appears. Then you'll see in the table at the bottom of the page, so spelt out in full in the table. This is the first noun declension table in the grammar, so he spells it out in full. Thereafter, in this textbook, and you'll find this in most grammar textbooks, you will see it in the abbreviated form, as in the table at the bottom of page 5. So, nominative dhammo, accusative dhammang, genitive dhammassa, dative dhammaya or dhammassa. When we deal with the dative in more detail, I will explain about the dative and the genitive having become mostly merged into one case form in Pali. Bear in mind that in Sanskrit there is no merger of genitive and dative. In Pali there is an almost complete merger, with the exception of this aya form. You see the maya that you see in this table halfway down page 5. For all of the other declensions, they have merged. For example, if you look over to the genitive dative plural, you'll see instead of two boxes, the massa and the maya / the massa, in the plural column is given just one form, the manam. That's because the dative and the genitive have been merged in all plural forms. In fact, the dhammanam in Sanskrit, dharmanam, is the genitive form. There is a separate Sanskrit form, dharmebhya, meaning which is the genitive. Sorry, dative. But that form for the dative plural has disappeared in Pali. So dative dhammayo dhammassa, instrumental dhammena, the ablative dhamma or dhammasma or dhammamha. In Sanskrit, that is actually dharmat. It's an at ending. Let me just write it for you here. Ablative Sanskrit dharmat. In Pali, dhamma. So that at ending is typical of the ablative of a stem nouns. Pali words aren't allowed to end in a T, so with the Sanskrit has an at, that the T will just drop off in Pali, that accounts for dhamma, which you will note is the same as the nominative plural ending. That's where you get more ambiguities in Pali, so whereas Sanskrit distinguishes between ablative singular dharmat and nominative plural dharmaha with an h sound at the end, they both become dhamma in Pali. Note that there are alternative ablative forms. It can be dhammasma or dhammamha. You will find these used with no distinction of meaning, and they're just used indiscriminately. Even within the same sentence, you'll find these different alternative forms of the ablative used. And I do emphasize no distinction whatsoever of meaning. It's purely stylistic, and it doesn't matter which one you use. I would just observe that the most commonly used one is dhamma, but you'll see the others very frequently. Likewise with the locative. The locative, dhamme exactly reflects the Sanskrit form. In Sanskrit, dharme, spelled exactly the same, but with the m instead of a double M. But you'll see the alternative forms allowable in Pali but not in Sanskrit. Dhammasmin or dhammame. Again, as with the ablative, the alternative forms in the ablative, there is no distinction of meaning, and you will even find them used alongside each other, not in the same noun, of course, but one noun in one form, and a couple of words later, a noun equally in the same case, in the locative case, in a different form. And the vocative with the short dhamma. Here, it's given the alternative form with a long R in brackets, but as was stated in the note above, if it's a pure alternative form, it's given as a slash. Now, hang on, that's not how they've done it. The alternative form R here is actually quite rare. For the vocative, you just almost always see Ananda Buddha, and they just call him Moggallana for calling their name with a short R. So this long R for the vocative is actually not that common. Now look at the plural. The ma, same in form, but of course entirely different in meaning from the ablative singular dhamma. Vaya sankhara. So vaya dhamma sankhara. Accusative dhamme. Again, it's in form, it's the same as the locative singular dhamme. In Sanskrit, that here we are. So the accusative plural in Sanskrit would be in dharman, and that an ending that you see for an astem noun is unambiguously accusative plural, masculine accusative plural. But in Pali, we just see it turning up as dhamme. But you'll pretty much always be able to detect from the context whether we're talking about a locative singular or an accusative plural. Okay, so genitive and dative, as I was explaining earlier, these two forms have been merged. Dhammanang for both, reflecting the Sanskrit genitive plural only, but not dative plural, genitive plural only, dharmanam. No Pali word can end in a long a followed by the anuswara ng or m form at the end, shortened to dhammanam. Sanskrit dharmanam. The ablative form, ablative and instrumental, dhammehi, and alternative form, dhammebhi, but that's a rare-ish form. You tend to see it only in the later literature, the commentarial literature. That there may be instances of it occurring in the canonical text. By canonical, I mean the earlier suttas that are recorded as being the actual words of the Buddha of his direct disciples. You will see Dhammehi. I'm not sure if any that form turns up, but if it does, it's rare in the older literature. And the locative, the esu ending, dhammesu in Sanskrit would be dharmeshu. Russians, and so that means in the dharmas. Sorry, dharmeshu in Sanskrit, dhammesu in Pali. And the vocative, dhamma. You'll note that with the exception of the one irregularity that we saw earlier, bhikkhave, as an irregular locative plural, it's safe to say that in the plural, the vocative is always the same as the nominative, with this one. I can only think in my head of one exception to that rule, that is bhikkhave, O monks. Otherwise, a vocative always the same as nominative in the plural. Now we're going to look at the neuter stems. Um, the effort of learning here, if you've learnt the declension of Dhamma in the table in the middle, then you've done most of the work, almost all of the work you need for the neuter forms. I'll explain in a moment. By the way, I've been saying such and such. Don't bother to remember this by heart. One table that's actually really useful and you should learn by heart as rapidly as you can is this table in the middle of page 5, because this is, I mean, these forms are going to turn up in virtually every single sentence of Pali that you read, and so just get to know them well. Some of the forms many of you will know already. You know that the nominative is Buddho, Arahang Samma Sambuddho. That's that's in the nominative form because you're not addressing the Buddha there. You're just stating his name, Araha Samma Sambuddho. Um, and you already, from your previous experience in chanting, know the accusative form, as in Buddhang Saranang Gacchami. And you know the genitive slash dative form. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Here it functions as a dative. Namo homage sambuddhassa, to the fully enlightened. So these are three that you know already. Many of you will know the phrase, the Dhamma taught by the Buddha. By the Buddha, instrumental. Dhammo, nominative. Buddhena, by the Buddha, desito, taught. Just remember, Dhammo Buddhena desito. Now we look at the neuter a stems at one spot 22, second half of page 5. Neuter a stems, these also have a stem in a in glossaries. They will end in the nominative singular Note that he's referring here just to the glossaries in this particular grammar. If you're looking them up in a dictionary, it will not have that form, which it'll just appear as a. So if you want to look up, see the word rupam in a text, you want to look it up, you look up rupa without that grammatical ending. Note that neuter nouns of this class differ from the masculine ones only in a few forms, specifically the masculine, specifically the nominative, correct, nominative, as you will see below. The nominative and the accusative are the same for all neuter nouns. Yeah, that is the same across the language. Those of you who know the classics or any of the Slavonic languages, for example, and will know, and German indeed, that across the Indo-European languages that retain the distinction between nominative and neuter, correction, between masculine and neuter. For example, as the Slavonic languages do, as German does, as classical and modern Greek did and do, and as Latin did. Nominative and accusative are always the same for the neuter. There's a change. They're different in form if it's a masculine noun, different in form usually if it's a feminine noun. But in neuter nouns, neuter nouns, nominative and accusative, always the same. So let's look at the top of that table. If you compare, look at rupam, singular, rupam, plural, rupani. Now compare that with the table above for Dhamma. You'll see that the accusative of Dhamma is Dhammang. Here we are. The nominative and accusative of Rupa is Rupang. That's usual and regular for neuter nouns of this declension. Look also at the nominative plural of Dhamma. It is Dhamma. And look now for Rupa. The plural is Rupani for both nominative and accusative. And this ani ending is very common, and it's the typical ending for nouns, neuter nouns in stem a. Now, as for the rest of it, you will see that it's identical, subject to a couple of things that I will mention. You'll see the genitive, instrumental, ablative, locative, identical, no difference at all. In the vocative, you'll see under rupa or rupang, whereas for the dhammas, dhamma or dhamma, these two alternative endings given for the vocative, the long a for the masculine and the ang for the neuters, they're far less common. Most commonly, you'll just see the ending in a short a for the vocative. And as always, as I mentioned earlier, with the one exception we've seen, bhikkhave, O monks, you'll find that the vocative in the plural is always the same as the nominative. So the O forms is rupani. We now go over to page 6, where we deal with the feminine nouns, feminine e and e stems. Let's see, these actually represent two classes, or we'd say two declensions mostly, but they're almost always the same. They are almost the same. Note that in Sanskrit, there are more differences between the E and the E stems. In Pali, the differences are very slight, so it's convenient, to merge them into one for the purposes of teaching. And the two different nouns are given. You'll see ratti with a short e. Many of you will remember from the chant Rattindi Vamatandito, day and night untiring. That's the accusative Rattingsi Rattindi Vamatandito. So Ratti, meaning night, is actually Ratri in Sanskrit. I mean, it's Ratri in Sanskrit. And by regular phonetic mutation, it becomes Ratti in Pali. Those of you who know Hindi or Urdu will recognize there the word Rat, meaning night. Rat ko, at night. But yes, so Ratti. Now look down to the nominative singular of the next one down, Nadi, meaning a river. Note that the difference there is Ratti ends in a short I, whereas Nadi ends in a long E. Note, however, that the whole of the rest of it, the whole of the rest of the declension of these two nouns is identical. So they differ in the nominative singular, ratti, nadi, but throughout the rest of the declension they are identical. Just remember that is not the case in Sanskrit. I'll guide you to that later. So look down here. So ratti, nominative, accusative, ratting. Now here it's the same. You just add a anuswara, that subdotted ing sound to the nominative to get to the stem to get the accusative. And buddha, buddhang, ratti, ratting. You do the same. Genitive, dative, instrumental, ablative. You'll see they're all different in Sanskrit, mostly different in Sanskrit, but they've kind of merged into one form in Pali. It's rattiya for all of those 5 cases. For all those 5 cases, with the exception that in the locative you can have rattiya or rattiyang. Both forms you will find. And vocative, ratti, same as the nominative here. Now look at the plural. you have two alternative forms for the nominative and accusative plural. Note that there's a different for the masculine nouns in stem a. In the plural, the nominative and the accusative are different. In Pali, dhamma and dhamme. In Sanskrit, dharmaha and dharman. For these feminine nouns, the nominative and the accusative are in fact, although different in the singular, they are the same in the plural, and there are alternative forms. You'll frequently see both. So knights in the plural is either ratio or rati, the difference being that there's a lengthening of the I to E. Now look at the genitive and dative. Here we see the merger. So ratinam, of the knights in the plural. Incidentally, note that wherever you get this enum, anum, enum form, the vowel before the n is always long. Bhikkhu, bhikkhunam, of the bhikkhus. Rati, ratinam, of the knights. Dhamma, dhammo, dhammanam, of the dhammas. So here we see the ratinam, the genitive and the dative, they say merged in Pali. For the instrumental and the ablative, you see ratihi or ratibhi. I mentioned when I was discussing the form for dhamma that the bhi ending is far, far less common. You almost always see it with just the h on it, ratihi. So let's go back to the dhamma, declension of dhamma on the previous page in the plural, dhammehi. It's the same he ending, but for rati, it's rather than ehi, it's ihi, ratihi. Likewise, look at the locative plural of dhamma, dhammesu, and for rati, ratisu, and you always lengthen the e before the num, the enum in the genitive dative, before the ihi in the instrumental and ablative plural, and before the locative isu in the locative plural. This does depart from Sanskrit. We'll deal with that as we go on. And as usual, vocative plural, exactly the same as the nominative plural. Alternative forms rati or rati, identical with nominative. We look now at the nadi. Well, there's not much more to be said because in Pali, which lightens your learning load, the only difference is in the nominative singular. In the nadi declension, it's a long e. There are substantial differences between the declension of ratri and nadi in Sanskrit, but when we come over into Pali, it's been simplified somewhat, and the only difference between the two is in the nominative singular, the short e and the long e. So this brings this video almost to a close. I do emphasize there's been rather a lot of material here. This video has been going for almost an hour. I see. Just make sure that you've understood what has been said. What I would counsel you to learn by heart as soon as you possibly can is just the declension of Dhamma halfway down page 5, because you're going to see that the entire time, and it's really useful if you don't have to scrabble around in your memory to what form is that. Just learn it so well it becomes automatic to you. And also in due course memorize the declension of rati, but the vitally important one to commit to memory, so you really know it, is dhamma, and that will just give you the declension for all of the nominatives, and of course with rupam, with a little difference there, all of the stem nouns in Sanskrit, and adjectives, of course. Incidentally, stem a accounts for a little over 50% of all noun forms in Sanskrit and Pali, and that's why I say it's particularly worth learning this one by heart. You'll just encounter it the whole. There's hardly a sentence in Pali where you're not going to get these forms appearing, or or these nouns appearing, astem nouns in one grammatical variant or another. So that brings us to the end of this video, and dead on 1 hour. Thank you.